Welcome to the NBAV podcast.
Welcome back to NBAV, the NBA Avenue podcast. After last night's NBA action, it was a full slate of games. You had a Sixers victory, you had a Pacers victory, and now in the Eastern Conference, the Sixers have somehow, with the addition of Joel Embiid back into the lineup, have won 6 games in a row and have the longest win streak in the NBA. Now, it's probably not going to amount to too much excitement just yet because if you make it into the play-in, which they'll be in the play-in at least, and you lose, now you're still eliminated from the playoffs, so it doesn't really make a difference if you win 6 or 7 or 100 games in a row. If you're in the play-in and you lose, then your season is absolutely toast. But just think about how poorly the Sixers were playing before Joel Embiid came back, to now look at them and say, hey, you've won 6 ball games in a row, and you're still only in the 7th seed. Now, part of that also has to do with the fact that the Pacers also won their last 3 ball games and are getting a little bit of momentum with their backs up against the wall. The Pacers have now put themselves in a position where all the Pacers have to do is win 1 game of these last 2. They have the Cavaliers and the Hawks, so 2 winnable games right there. The Cavaliers are really struggling. And the Hawks are playing actually pretty well for what they have right now. And Trae Young is coming back. But all you got to do is win one of those 2 ball games, and you will clinch at least the 6th seed. Not to mention, since you're going head-to-head with the Cavaliers, if you beat them, then you can actually move in front of the Cavaliers. Not to mention the Magic are also right there, tied in the 4-5 spot right now with Cleveland. So the Pacers just need to win 1 more ball game to make sure that they're not going to be in the play-in, and they should probably get that done. Then on the other hand, you have the Sixers, who can't really do too much. The Sixers have 2 games remaining against the Magic and the Brooklyn Nets. So the Brooklyn Nets game is certainly very winnable, but even if you win a ball game, it doesn't really matter as long as the Pacers or Cavaliers each win at least one of their ball games. The Sixers are probably not going to catch anyone. So the Sixers don't really have control of their own destiny. They're probably going to be playing the Heat in a first-round play-in game for the rights to be in the playoffs. So you have that. The Sixers are basically settling in at the 7 seed or maybe the 8 seed, and the Heat are settling in at the 8 seed or maybe the 7 seed. The Pacers are probably settling in at 6 or maybe 5 or 4, along with the Cavaliers and the Orlando Magic, and that's what you have in the Eastern Conference. Then you have the Western Conference, where the Warriors won a big game against the Lakers last night, and they're setting themselves up to try and steal home court advantage. They're only half a game back of the Lakers right now. But the Lakers have also played 1 more game. I'm sorry, yes, the Lakers have played 1 more game. The Warriors have played 1 game fewer. So if the Lakers and Warriors were both to win out, so if the Warriors won their 3 remaining games and the Lakers won their 2 remaining games, then they would be exactly tied, and the tiebreaker would go to Golden State, considering that Golden State just won and now owns the tiebreaker against the Lakers. So if the Warriors beat the Pelicans, the Blazers, and the Jazz, and that's certainly a very winnable schedule. Pelicans, Blazers, Jazz. Pelicans haven't been playing their best. They got a win against the Blazers last night, but that's not exactly the toughest competition. So if the Warriors win their last 3 and the Lakers beat the Pelicans and the Grizzlies and win their last 2, then the Warriors would have the tiebreaker and be tied with the Lakers and be the home court team in the play-in game. Of course, the Warriors could lose a game, and then the Lakers would then have a much better shot of winning the home court advantage. And but we'll have to see what happens in the final couple of games. Both teams, the Lakers and Warriors, have winnable schedules, but the Warriors now have destiny in their own hands now that they beat the Lakers, and they can go out and win the last 3 ball games. Doing that would put them in front of the Lakers, and they would get to play in Golden State. Now, not that it really matters that much, because the Warriors just beat the Lakers last night in LA. So the Lakers are certainly capable of losing on their home court. The Warriors are certainly capable of winning on the road. They've been a very good road team this year. They're 24-16 on the road. They have a better record on the road than they do at home. So the Warriors, it's tough to say. Where would they really want to play? It doesn't even necessarily really matter. So you have 3 games left for the Warriors, 2 for the Lakers, and the Warriors may actually end up being the 9, and the Lakers may be the 10. And then at 8, only 1 half game ahead of the Lakers is the Sacramento Kings. The Kings have the Pelicans, the Suns, and the Blazers, so a mixed bag there. Pelicans, Suns, Blazers. The Suns are really struggling as well. The Suns have the Wolves, the Clippers, and the Kings. So the Suns need a win out, and they need the Pelicans to lose at least one so that they can, where they have the Suns have the tiebreaker against the Pelicans, and they're 1 game back of them. So if the Suns can just manage to get into a tie with the Pelicans, they need to improve their standing 1 game. So there's 3 games remaining for the Pelicans, 3 for the Suns, and the Suns would have to win all 3, and then the Pelicans would have to lose 1, and then the Suns would be in good position. But are the Suns going to win out against the Wolves, Clippers, and Kings? It's hard to say. The Kings then are still in that cluster as well, where the Kings are in 8th. They're trying to stay ahead of the Lakers, who now, after losing to the Warriors last night, that becomes a much more realistic possibility for the Kings. And the Kings are only a 1 game back of the Suns, but with their tough schedule as well, it's going to be hard for the Kings to move in front of the Suns. So it's really just a cluster right there. The Pelicans are trying to stay in 6th. The Suns are trying to move up to 6th. The Kings are trying to stay in front of the Lakers. The Lakers are trying to catch the Kings. And then the Warriors are trying to just stay in the mix there as well and see what they can do in these final 3 ball games. In terms of the Atlanta Hawks, they have Trae Young, who may come back. I didn't think he was going to make it back this season, but it turns out he probably will. And he's going to be back for his favorite time of the year, which is the play-in game, where he loves to put on a show in that game. So I think the Hawks are very dangerous if they get Trae Young back for the play-in, and I wouldn't really want to have to face them, or really anyone, but I specifically wouldn't want to face the Hawks in the play-in game, where they're very, very dangerous. They beat the Heat last season, and then the Heat went on to make it all the way to the NBA Finals. So I certainly wouldn't want to play the Heat I wouldn't want to play the Hawks when the Hawks have Trae Young back, because he's the kind of guy who just absolutely loves to put on a show in this play-in game. And if there's anyone who has sort of a weird mentality in the NBA where they are not nervous to play in a play-in game and they revel in the spotlight and the one-and-done tournament nature of the play-in tournament. Well, do you call it a tournament? I don't know if it's a tournament, but it has a tournament feel because you can get eliminated with a single loss as opposed to a full playoff series. And Trae Young just seems like he's really made for this sort of game. So I'd be very, very nervous to go up against him. And then on the flip side, where the Sixers just got Embiid back, and they're playing well. They won 6 in a row, longest win streak in the league. The Hawks seems to be getting Trae Young back. It looks like Giannis has a calf strain, which is going to put him out for a couple of weeks, which is going to take them into the playoffs, and the Bucks are really up against it, and they're in a massive, massive trouble. I'm not sure how the Bucks are going to play themselves out of this really tough position. Brook Lopez has not looked like himself. Chris Middleton hasn't turned fully back into himself. Giannis out, and now suddenly you're fully reliant on Damian Lillard, who has not exactly been a source of playoff wins and playoff excitement and amazing playoff performances in his career. He's really been more disappointing in the playoffs than he's been a success story. Unfortunately, they've had some bad playoff losses, and they've even gotten swept by lesser teams in the playoffs. That has happened to Damian Lillard alongside CJ McCollum, and now he may even have a worse team if Giannis isn't going to be able to suit up. He may have the worst playoff team that he's ever had, not to mention they're playing very poorly. So very, very tough situation there in Milwaukee. Then you have a Rockets team who've been playing so well, but in just 2-3 games, their season is done. So it's just a moral victory for Houston. They played okay throughout the entire season, below average. They were under 500 by 6, 7, 8 games, and then suddenly they won 10 games in a row, and they won, and actually it was 11 games in a row, and now they're playing so well. The only team that was really able to beat them over the last several was the Dallas, where Houston didn't capitalize on free throws at the end of the ball game, and Dallas was able to steal it in overtime. due to some heroics from PJ Washington and some heroics from Dante Exum and Luka and Kyrie and the entire team. But a moral victory doesn't get you very far in professional sports. And it's strange how well the Rockets have played without Şengün, and there's no saying that when Şengün comes back next year that things are just going to click and things are going to take off from the way they're playing right now and that they're just going to start to continue to win ball games. The NBA is not a straight line. It's not linear, and they could start the season next year feeling good about themselves, and next thing you know, it's a tough schedule. The West is super hard to win in. They could lose 5 in a row and then just be looking down the barrel of another very tough season, and they could miss the playoffs again. The West is going to be even more ridiculous next season with Ja Morant coming back, everyone improving, Wemby having another year under his belt, and it's going to be even tougher to make the playoffs next year than it was this year. So you're going to be welcoming Şengün back. You're way better without Şengün over the last 15, 20 games of the season than you were with Şengün for the first 60 to 70 games of the season. And there's no guarantee that you guys are going to make the playoffs next year. So I don't think there's any moral victories in the NBA. You could say, hey, we played great down the final 20 games of the year, and it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's just a moral victory. And if you look at the West next season, there's really only maybe the Blazers and the Jazz, so you could look at and say, hey, you could write those teams off. And even the Jazz, you can't 100% write them off. So it's going to be really tough for the Rockets, and I would not take this moral victory too far if I were you. Now we're going to fast forward to the future. And we're going to look at the 10 worst franchises heading into the future after the 2023-2024 NBA season. So now that this season is basically going to be finished, the bottom 10 teams, the franchise you would not want to be going into the future. And in the 10 spot, there were really a few teams you could go with. I was flirting with putting the Kings on this list because the Kings are probably, or they may lose Malik Monk, and if they couldn't really make it this year and they're barely scraping into the playoffs, what's going to happen in the future? But they do have a lot of good players on their team, and ultimately when you have De'Aaron Fox, who's a top player in the league, I couldn't quite put them on the list. Now, the 10th team, 10th in terms of the worst playoff, not playoff, but worst total outlook for a franchise, I would put the Los Angeles Clippers. James Harden is going to be a free agent this season. And they're going to be left with a 33-year-old Paul George and a 32-year-old Kawhi Leonard. And by next season, they'll really be even a year older than that. Paul George is a guy who's probably not going to age very well. And Kawhi Leonard is the type of guy who, when he's done, he's probably just going to be done. These guys have their best years behind them. And if you have those two guys at the top, what are you going to do? Are you going to be forced to re-sign James Harden just because you have no real other option? Are you going to try to put your money in on DeRozan, who's also in that same boat? It seems like your heyday was kind of behind you, and we don't even know if the Clippers are going to be able to win even one round in the playoffs. So looking forward, the Clippers really don't have very much on the horizon to look forward to, especially if they don't get out of round one this year. So if the Clippers get eliminated in round one, which they probably will, especially if they're facing Dallas, which looks like the most likely scenario, if they get knocked off in the first round by Dallas, you're looking down the barrel of not exactly a very good future moving forward for the Los Angeles Clippers. Then, in terms of the ninth worst outlook for the future of your NBA team, I would have to go with the Atlanta Hawks. Their team is locked in for the next several seasons. The only way that they can move out from the position that they're in is by making trades. Because Capella is locked in for another season. Trae Young is locked in. DeJounte Murray is locked in. Everyone's locked in on that team. So you're just going to take a team that's barely making it into the play-in tournament, and you're going to say, hey, the only way that we can fix our standing and improve over the future is by making trades and getting rid of Trae Young or DeJounte Murray. That's not a very good place for your team to be. So ultimately, you're in the bottom because you have a team that's barely worthy of a play-in spot, and it's going to be very hard to improve your team. And that's a really tough place to be if you're an NBA franchise, and if you're an NBA fan base. What do you really have to look forward to as a Hawks fan? You're in that exact middle territory with no real way to move up and perhaps only ways to move down. Very tough position if you're an Atlanta Hawks fan. Moving in at number 8, I would say, is the Utah Jazz. They're a frisky team. They start off the seasons well. But ultimately, Larry Markkinen and Colin Sexton are only enough to get you maybe to the same place that you're in right now. The Jazz are in the Western Conference. It's really, really tough. And they may have the second worst outlook heading into next season with Wembanyama having another season under his belt. And the West getting tougher and tougher. And the Spurs are going to be even tougher next season. And you may be the only team ahead of the Blazers in the Western Conference in terms of it's just maybe the only team worse than you would maybe be the Blazers heading into next season. The Jazz are in a really tough position considering that they're not in the Eastern Conference like most of these teams are. Most of the bad teams are in the East. And Sexton and Markkinen are good, but they're not that good. And how are you going to improve? You have John Collins on the books for another 2 seasons after this one, and it's really hard to imagine how the Jazz can possibly make the playoffs next season. So that's really not cool. And how can you even improve? You have frisky guys in Markkinen and Sexton and Kessler, but they're not that great. Especially not when you put them up there and you try to compare them with the other teams in the West. That's a really tough position to be in. So the Jazz coming in at the 8th worst outlook heading out of the 2023-2024 NBA season. Coming in at 7, I'm going with the Chicago Bulls. You have DeMar DeRozan and Patrick Williams coming off the books. But who can you really bring in Chicago that's going to change the trajectory? You're now looking at, you have to work Zach LaVine back in coming off of the surgery, and you do have Kobe White, who's certainly a bright spot. But DeRozan has been really good for you in close games this season, and he's been really good for you in overtime games this season. So what are you going to do? He's getting older and older. Are you just going to re-sign him? You don't know how he's going to look with Zach LaVine back in the fray? You're barely a play-in team, and you don't have any real way to improve. So the Bulls are in a very dire situation, and I don't know who they can really bring in the offseason to change the trajectory of their team. Then, at 6, I'm going with the Detroit Pistons. I understand they have a couple of guys who look like they might be promising, but Cade Cunningham didn't exactly have the year that you were hoping. And Jaden Ivey didn't have the year you were hoping. And Monty Williams isn't the coach that you hoped he would be. And you don't really have anyone else who's like a franchise changer. Jalen Duren looks like he could be good, but their youth is perplexing. We don't really know how good their youth is going to be. So what do you hope from Fontecchio? Like, where do you think you're going if you're a Piston? Considering we don't know how good all of their youth is, and we don't know how to improve this team. We don't know who to trust in and who not to trust in. So they're going to come in at 6 in a really poor position as one of the worst teams in the NBA. Coming in at number 5, I'm going with the Charlotte Hornets. And the only reason why the Hornets aren't lower is because of Brandon Miller. But how much and how far can Brandon Miller take your team? You have a very injury-prone LaMelo Ball at the top of your team. You're losing Miles Bridges, who's actually one of your better players, and it's hard to know, are they going to re-sign him or not? And if you pull up the Hornets' payroll right now, it doesn't look very good. You have Bertans for another season. You have Grant Williams for another several seasons. You have Micic for another 2 seasons, and Cody Martin for another 2, and Nick Richards for another 2, and Mark Williams for another 2, and Nick Smith Jr. for another 3. And none of these guys are any good. What are you going to do with this team? This is a real bottom feeder team for the Charlotte Hornets, and the only bright spot you have is Brandon Miller. So they're coming in as the 5th worst franchise looking forward in the future. Coming in at number 4, I'm going with the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors are in a really bad position. Really bad. It's very, very dark. So extremely dark for Toronto. They're losing Gary Trent and Kelly Olynyk, 2 of the better players on their team. They're losing Emmanuel Quickley, and they'll have to figure out, do they want to re-sign him? The top of their team is R.J. Barrett, Bruce Brown, and Jakob Poeltl. And then you have Boucher and Scotty Barnes, who is really the defensive anchor. Your draft pick in Grady Dick isn't looking very good, and he's going to be on your books for another few seasons. Jalen McDaniels will be around for 1 more, and you have Agbaji, who's not going to push the needle. It's going to be really hard without any amazing young talent, and you didn't take advantage and trade the pieces you needed to trade, and you're now going to lose them for nothing. The Raptors have nowhere to go. They're not freeing up that much money in this offseason. It'll be about $30 million and not great ways to spend it. The Raptors are stuck. They're not going to be good for several more seasons. And the draft isn't really a source of very much coming up this season. They're in a really bad position. The Raptors are screwed. They're effed. And they're coming in as the fourth worst outlook franchise after this season. Coming in at 3, we're going with the Brooklyn Nets. Because the Nets are only losing Nick Claxton, Lonnie Walker, Dennis Smith. They're freeing up basically no money. They have Ben Simmons for another year. They have Cam Johnson for another 3. Mikal Bridges for another 2. Finney Smith for another 2. Clowney and Whitehead. These guys, Keita Bates-Diop, Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe. I mean, they have nothing on this roster. The only thing they have is the perimeter of a roster with Bridges and Johnson, but they don't have the 1 and the 2 and the 3. And those are the 3 hardest spots to find. Where are you finding a bona fide number 1 in the NBA right now? Where are you finding a 2? Where are you finding a 3? Mikal Bridges is maybe a 4, maybe a 3 on a good day. So considering that you have to find 1, 2, and 3, and there's no way that you can find it, the Nets are totally done for the next several seasons. Really, really in a horrible position. In my opinion, the 3rd worst position in the NBA. The 2nd worst are the Washington Wizards. This is a team that's lost with no hopes of improving. The only player who they're losing going into next season is Tyus Jones, and he was one of their best guys. Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma for another 3 seasons each. Denny for another 4 seasons. Koulibaly for 3, and Shamet for another 2, and Patrick Baldwin Jr. for 2 more, and Johnny Davis, the dud, and Kispert for another 1, Bagley for another 1, Rashawn Holmes for another 1. They have nowhere to go. The Wizards are so screwed. And then at the top, the number 1 worst franchise moving forward is the Blazers, because they're spending $35 million a year for the next 2 on DeAndre Ayton. 4 more years of Jeremy Grant, 2 more of Simons, another 1 at $22.5 million for Brogdon. Robert Williams doesn't even play, and he's going to be around for 2 more seasons. Ty Bull at $11 million a year for the next 2. Scoot Henderson has been a complete bust so far. Shaedon Sharpe doesn't play enough, and he'll be around for 2 more seasons. It's an absolute dumpster fire in Portland. Trading Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum didn't get you anywhere. You're in a much worse position than when you had them. And there's no way that you guys can move forward with any ounce of positivity. You guys are absolutely screwed. Follow the show as always at NBAV. That's NBAVE, short for NBA Avenue. We're your source for a great time every time. And until next time, we are out.